George, glad to have you join us on Power Lunch West Africa.
Great to be back.
So I'd like to start by having you talk us through what you term the value chain complexities in Côte d'Ivoire's cocoa production sector.
Well, I think the essential problem is that the farmer is invisible in the value chain. You have up to 1.5 million tons of cocoa, which just magically appears either at a warehouse in the countryside or at one of the grinders. You don't know who it's come from. Only around 25% is traced by organizations like Fairtrade and Rainforest Alliance, and you can say it came from this cooperative or this producer group. And that means not only can you not control how the cocoa is being produced, i.e. is it destroying the environment, is it bad for the local economy, but also you can't actually help the farmers. You can't give them the things they need like direct financing, insurance. But if you can deploy technology, yes, you can. And that is the real breakthrough moment.
Now, George, in your report, you speak of data management as a challenge in Côte d'Ivoire's cocoa industry. You speak essentially of a lack of data. You speak essentially of no lack of data, and then you recommend better data management. I'd like you to speak to the day-to-day realities of data as a challenge in Côte d'Ivoire's cocoa industry.
Well, absolutely. Look, this is a problem for all African markets about data, but I fundamentally disagree that there's bad data. There's a lot of it. The trouble is it's all over the place. Some of it's on laptops or spreadsheets or on pieces of paper. There is no real overall analysis of it. You do get the big trading houses like Cargill, Barry Callebaut. They have very good data flows, but they are internal, proprietary systems, and they don't tend to share it with anyone else. So that means even though the data may exist, let's say in a cooperative somewhere in Côte d'Ivoire, no one actually knows how to leverage this data. But there's now a whole series of systems that first of all will help digitalize the information as it goes in. So we see the cocoa coming in from the farmer with a bag of cocoa, all tracked and traceable back to the farmer and through the system. But also when you aggregate the data, you can then actually start getting value out of it. You can, for example, heat map an area and say, this is where there are high yields, this is where there are low yields. This is where farmers are only earning this much. We need to try and see, can we improve it? And also for stamping out fraud. One simple thing, you can look at a farmer and say, why do you have a yield 3 times as high as all of your neighbors? That might suggest that they're mixing beans that are certified and non-certified. So there's so much you can do about creating, crunching the data. But essentially what you're doing is you're making the farmers bankable. You're making it possible to give them things like financial services and insurance.
George, sounds absolutely intriguing. Now, I'm interested in how you plan to co-opt farmers who are largely illiterate into a digitized cocoa farming system.
Well, absolutely. Listen, one of the people in one of the cooperatives I spoke to actually said to me, the big problem actually is the mental block in most farmers. It's not about the technology. It's not about do you have the network. A lot of people simply don't want to use digital. And if you think of the success of M-Pesa in Kenya, it took them 2 to 3 years to convince people that actually this is what you can use as money, on a digital phone. The big issue here is about coming up with solutions that basically work on the ground. So there's a lot of, for example, digital solutions with mobile phones, which don't always require a signal. You can upload and download data, those brief moments you do get signal, but you can make connections. I think the real thing is when one of the farmers can actually see a digital solution functioning and benefiting them, they'll never look back. And illiteracy or part literacy is not really necessarily a big problem. You can, with very innovative apps, have everything which is done audio in local language. You can have visual cues, buttons that you press. They can even teach as you learn, if you like, and try and be more effective in the husbandry of cocoa. So all of the different models and innovative tools are out there. It's just a question now of implementing them. But I do agree with you, the biggest barrier is in the mind. And for that, it's got to be one-on-one.
George, you speak of mental block, and you clearly already have found a way to navigate that path. But I'm worried about cultural shocks, or cultural shocks, so to speak. In what ways do you reckon that might be a challenge to this proposition, which is largely digital and based on technology?
Well, listen, let's be honest here. The control of information and data is really the control of power. And there are many parts of the value chain who don't want the farmers to know what they are being paid by the off-takers for collecting their cocoa. So there's always going to be some resistance from vested interests who don't actually want the farmers to get the information. But culturally, there are other issues. If you bear in mind, in Côte d'Ivoire, it's still the case that most farmers or farmers who own land are men. And that's very often for cultural reasons that women aren't allowed to own land. So that's a complicated one. We also have the issue in Côte d'Ivoire about identity. If you think about a lot of farmers are actually Burkinabe who came in maybe 20, 30 years ago. This issue of whether they're Ivorian or not is very politically tense. And it's an issue because if you can't identify them, you can't actually put them on the system. So all of these issues have to be addressed. But I think ultimately, as most farmers nowadays have a mobile phone in their hand, it's really just about getting them to take that step and to start using the power you get when you connect digitally. As they start to benefit from that, I think the only people who will lose out are the intermediaries and people in the middle who you could argue are not bringing much value.
George, when you speak of vested interest, I think of government and other regulators that should actually speak for or quote-unquote save the farmers in Côte d'Ivoire. Are you in talks, or has your report been extended to covering any of these stakeholders?
Well, absolutely. I mean, for example, the Ivorian government is now collaborating closely with the Ghanaian government. They've set what they call the living income differential, the LID. It's a price, an additional $400 a ton to be paid back to all farmers. And that is definitely going to be a benefit for them. And they're trying to improve cooperation. I think the problem is the fragmentation of the cocoa sector. Most of the cocoa is collected by people called pisteurs. They go out on motorbikes or in small trucks and they buy individually from farmers. And there are many intermediaries in the way who aggregate the cocoa before it gets to the grinders. All of these different vested interests in the middle are where you could argue there's a lot of people taking off money away from the farmers and not really bringing value. But ultimately, when it comes to the government and the CCC's commitment to the Ivorian farmers, it's very clear. It really is, if we can join together much better the value chain with data, we can remove the middlemen and get value delivered right back to the farmer where it's deserved.
George, I know in the past few months we have had aggressive conversations about pricing and repricing of cocoa just to ensure that the lives of the actual farmers get improved as a result of the returns that they get from their farming activities. But I'm thinking, in what way specifically will technology help ensure that this is a reality?
Well, I think the big issue here is going to be about transparency and how the money goes back to them. If you take, for example, the premium, which is paid for the quarter of cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire, which is produced under certified conditions, in other words, sustainably, those premiums are all now paid directly, digitally. They go into the farmer's phone or into the farmer's bank account. Before, they would go through a series of middlemen. They might even go to the head of cooperatives and would never be distributed. So that's a major benefit in terms of directly returning the money to farmers. But I think also there's the opportunity here as well for more transparency in how the cocoa is being produced. The government intends to use the LID to prop up the cocoa price next season, make it higher. And the hope is that in return, they will ask for certain things in return from the farmer. More proof about how they produced the cocoa and where they produced it. Because the damage that has been done environmentally by illegal cocoa production is a serious problem. 500,000 tons of cocoa is currently produced in what is called protected forest area. And the environmental destruction is appalling. I've seen it myself. Once you've done 2 or 3 seasons on a land which was rainforest, which is not suited for cocoa, you've killed the land. So that has to stop. And again, with transparency in the value chain, that's where you can help achieve that.
George, many thanks to you for your time on Power Lunch West Africa.
My pleasure.